When I think in terms of voting for a leader, you vote for lesser evil a lot of times. Never really offered a chance to vote for, choices between two saints, but we've got to make some decisions about who's going to have do the least amount of harm or at least have the maximum impact on the areas that we deem just. But I think about it in terms of also investment is like that too. So I can make an impact by voting at the ballot box. I'm here in Oregon. Maybe my vote doesn't matter as much, when it's coupled against the way our state leans, but I can also vote with my pocketbook, and I can vote where I spend my time and where I spend my money. And I think about that in terms of, shareholders and shareholder corporate accountability and transparency. And what sort of transparent efforts can a business put in place to make sure that they're at the governance level, obviously, following U.S. law is easy to some respects. There's people we can or can't sell to, but when it comes to the murkier areas on selling to our allies that may be involved in an unjust conflict, like what are some corporate governance techniques that can be used, and ultimately how can you be as transparent as possible so the shareholders can have a voice in complaining about a press release that might come out about how we're deploying new technology or who we're selling this technology to.
So let me say something briefly about kind of the superstructure of law that we Americans have helped to create to put some limits there. But then second, obviously there's some corporate governance aspects where people have to make decisions. So one of the things that has happened based on this just war tradition is that over the past 150 years, it's gone from philosophy and from theology into a very practical set of laws, what we call the War Convention or the Law of Armed Conflict, international humanitarian law. It goes all the way back to, for instance, the Code of Conduct for the U.S. military, what's often called the Lieber Code from the Civil War. And that spread actually throughout Europe by the end of the 19th century. There was also a set of laws limiting the destructiveness of weapons, the first one being the 1868 St. Petersburg Declaration, and it had to do with certain types of exploding bullets to limit them. And throughout the 20th century, it didn't stop them always being used, but we came to ban biological weapons and chemical weapons. We created a nuclear non-proliferation treaty designed to limit the proliferation of nuclear weapons. There's a conventional weapons convention that the United States is a leader on. I could go on, but what's important in this is the U.S., led by leaders who were democratically elected, has been a leader in bringing international consensus towards the Geneva Conventions, towards the Hague Conventions, towards the Torture Convention, in an effort to create a body of law that embraces these kind of fundamental values. Note that it wasn't top-down. Note that it was a democratic country through our processes in electing people to represent us, and then our government agencies being the ones to create this rule structure for international life, including limits on what are called dual-use technologies, something that can be used both in the kitchen and in a bomb. That's the superstructure. That's important. A lot of us don't always see it, and it comes from these older just war restraints. But that doesn't stop corporations from having to make their own decisions about the paths of research that they're going to take, the types of weapons that they're going to create, the ways that they will try to buy or sell things on the international market, the relationships that some corporations might have illicitly or through a third party with bad actors. I would say a really bad story from Europe in the 80s and the 90s is the way that technologies ended up in the hands of Saddam Hussein and in Pakistan, so that Pakistan, for instance, could create a nuclear weapon. And, it was European technologies and the story, through North Korea and Pakistan and things. Companies were complicit. They chose to look the other way. And so there really is we want to have moral leaders in corporations. We want to have real corporate governance to stop that from happening.
Yeah, I think of in terms of project management. You could have as best software as you can for managing a project, but it really comes down to the people you have in place, the leaders that are the taskmasters and the people employing the tasks. You got to have you need just men to employ just war and employ whatever sensible governing practices that a company may need to achieve those just results. And so I always harken back to the comment that sunlight's the best disinfectant. And if you, to the extent that, there's a lot of secrets involved in national security, and it's easy to hide a lot of the deal flow that may be going through to certain countries. But overall, if you can have a public company, like a publicly traded company that is already required to be transparent to investors to the extent the law allows and the extent that non-disclosure agreements can permit. What about transparency that can at least allow alarm bells to be raised, and for ethics committees to at least give a dissenting voice when a deal may be very tempting. How would you recommend employing that into corporate governance, into practices?
Yeah, I mean, what we're talking about in a sense is just statecraft in a sense, right? So what we're talking about is, first of all, the larger society oriented towards pursuing right ends of justice and peace. That's within a democratic society about the rule of law. And our principles, the way in a fallen world that we do that is through checks and balances, through accountability, through certain types of disclosures to different governing agencies, through corporate governance. These are all actually wonderful and important things. Why do we have them? We have them because way down deep inside, we know that we need to have limits we need to have checks and balances because of human fallenness. And so these are perfectly appropriate. I think that the biggest thing is that companies that have a mission and that live up to the mission that is something other than only profit. By the way, there's nothing wrong with profit. Profit allows us to reinvest. It allows us to pay our employees. It allows us to diversify. It allows us to invest. So there's nothing wrong with profit. But profitability cannot be, for its own sake, cannot be the only criteria for success. And by the way, most of the businessmen I know, they're captured by innovation. They're captured by contributing to the common good. They're captured by technological change. They're captured by patriotism of wanting to help their country. They love paying their employees well. So many of the successful, the kind of jaded Hollywood movie type of big fat tycoon, that's not really what most leaders in innovation in industry are like. Although we do have to always kind of be concerned about both ego and greed in these moments, right? But that's why we have corporate governance, really focused on what our mission is. What is our end? It's contributing to the private defense sector. It's contributing to national defense. It's helping our government protect our own citizens. It's helping our government stop evil doing from happening abroad. If that's the way we're thinking about our mission in terms of guardianship, protectorship, that's the way to get at this.